Hello and welcome to the Holyrood Sources podcast, where we take you inside Scottish politics. I'm Calum Macdonald. Hello. And also on the podcast, Geoff Aberdein, who was Chief of Staff to the First Minister, Salmond. Hello, Geoff.
Morning.
Where are you this morning, Geoff?
I'm in London.
Oh, nice. Andy Maciver is also on the pod. He was Director of Communications for the Scottish Conservatives. Hello, Andy.
Good morning.
Where are you this morning, Andy?
I'm in Edinburgh, but I'm going to Glasgow. And then I'm coming back to Edinburgh, so it'll all be fine.
That'll do. we don't need your diary. Geoff, what brought you to London? Are you doing all right this morning?
Yeah. President Macron asked for some advice on his future career opportunities. So I told him we don't have a space available at True North, but we'll keep him in mind.
Your voice is sort of half an octave lower this morning, Geoff. It's a little grisly, I suppose would be the word.
Yeah, it's the air quality in London.
Oh, okay.
That's what does it. That's what famously.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for finding the podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you're on YouTube, hello. Thanks for being there. You can find us on X as well to watch the best clips of this podcast, and you can subscribe to our mailing list to find out about events first. Go to holyroodsources.com and just put in your email address there. Speaking of events, let's announce the next one, shall we? Because in September, we're heading to Aberdein. At the invitation of the Aberdein and Grampian Chamber of Commerce, we are taking part in a special event called the Future of Energy. Geoff, this is part of Offshore Europe. Tell us what that is. What's our event all about?
Oh, it's the largest energy kind of expo conference in Europe, bringing together all major operators, developers, supply chain companies in all different disciplines in energy together. Linking to the obviously offshore renewables, oil and gas, green hydrogen. So it's going to be interesting. We're at a very crucial milestone in terms of our energy transition, and to understand a little bit more about that, we're going to be there firsthand. It's going to be really interesting. I think we're looking at about 600 people. Or, will be our biggest live event potentially if we sell our tickets. So that'll be great.
And with that in mind, guests to be announced, by the way. We will have speakers joining us on stage for conversation, of course, around energy and the issues of the moment. But we have got you an exclusive discount code for 25% off tickets to come and join us. So 2 instructions here to get your tickets to come and join us. The easiest way to find the website to get tickets, and I've tried this myself, it works. Just search for the Future of Energy AGCC, as in Aberdein and Grampian Chamber of Commerce. The Future of Energy AGCC, and then write this down for the discount code Holyrood 25. All one word, no spaces, capital letters in Holyrood. Holyrood 25 for the discount for 25% off, and we'll announce speakers on this podcast over the course of the next few weeks as well. We look forward to seeing you there. Very exciting. Right, good. Speaking of live events then, let's do a couple of your messages after you listened to John Swinney and Anas Sarwar on this podcast, and indeed Professor Sir John Curtis as well last week. If you were in the room, you got all 3 on the same evening, and if you've been listening and watching, then you've caught them over the last couple of weeks. This message comes in from Alan. Hi guys, great podcast. I listen every week. Thanks very much, Alan. He says, so John Swinney refuses to engage with Reform UK. A recent YouGov poll from the end of May showed 38% of working class voters support Reform UK, whom one would normally think of as potential SNP supporters. The way Swinney approaches this comes across like Hillary Clinton's description of Trump voters as deplorables, which didn't end well. I'm not suggesting that the SNP should consider coalition with Reform, but the tone and language of Swinney and others is not conducive to a healthy political environment. 38% is not some fringe far-right support base, and demonising such a large number of voters seems unhealthy in a properly functioning democracy. Andy, I feel like this is actually, I think we've touched on this on the podcast, is the need for care around how you engage with people who are feeling disillusioned and who are looking to Reform UK for answers. And I think Alan is expressing some anxiety, some worry, some concern, definitely some criticism of perhaps how political leaders are approaching Reform UK supporters right now.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's an ethical side to this and there's a tactical side to this, isn't there? I think that so by saying what he said on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, John Swinney has made a ethical distinction between Reform UK and other parties. I think that's different from a tactical distinction, to be honest with you. I mean, for example, I think it's in the SNP constitution, Geoff, that they won't work with the Scottish Conservative Party. I think that's so. I mean, but that's tactical. That's a kind of electoral thing. They're not suggesting the Scottish Conservative Party is illegitimate in any way. But I think that it borders more into an ethical distinction and the sort of the lingering suggestion that there is some illegitimacy about the views of Reform UK. And I think, I suppose the comparison would be when people during Jeremy Corbyn's reign said that, I suppose, he was a communist and that sort of thing, and I guess I would have flirted with that sort of thing too. So I think that the lines are blurry and they're quite difficult. I think ultimately the tactic was kind of tried at Hamilton. It didn't actually work.
Yeah.
So the tactic of saying these people are deplorable, the Hillary Clinton basket of deplorables, these people are not acceptable, they shouldn't really be part of our process. Obviously, John had his summit a few weeks before about extremism, and that was tactical as well. Though it hasn't really worked, is the truth. It's not really worked. It's not pushing people away from reform. It does not appear to be pushing people away. Difficulty is if you have somebody like we've had on this podcast, like Thomas Kerr from Glasgow, you don't listen to that guy and think he's an extremist. I mean, he's just not. Look, I don't like the policies of Reform UK, and they wouldn't get my vote, but I don't know, are they an illegitimate political party? I don't think so.
There is also something, and I'm not necessarily applying this to Reform UK at all, but there is something actually that if you use this language about a kind of challenger party that sees itself as counter to the mainstream and counter to the kind of overarching unanimity in politics, that actually this is a badge of honour. That if you turn around and say you're a bunch of deplorables, then that tightens people together, for example. Now, I'm not saying that's the case with Reform UK at all, but actually there is something that language can make a more cohesive group, because it means that people are standing up against it. See what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think that people will say, look, people will look at what they are being badged as because they're voting for reform and say, well, I don't accept that. That's not who I am. And how dare you say that it is? So, I mean, I think there is that potential backlash, yeah.
Shall I go on to Michelle's message next? So, Michelle was listening to the John Curtis part of the podcast special. Michelle says, I can explain to Kat Headley, friend of the pod, why Labour government is being interrogated so soon after the election. It's because people aren't stupid, and we realise that unlike the piecemeal devolution that the Scottish government has to work under, the UK government has all the powers to change the UK. Labour in Scotland continues to believe all roads don't lead to Westminster. Labour in Wales realise they do. Geoff, I actually think the Labour in Wales example is one we'll get into before the Scottish parliamentary election next year, because it's an example of where Labour have been running a devolved administration and they do face criticism for it, and the closure of industry, NHS struggles, etc. I do think it's probably quite a helpful example in that case. This is something that you engaged with on the night as well, with Kat and with John Curtis about the scrutiny that each party faces.
Yeah, I feel every sympathy for Kat's position. But quite clearly she doesn't want the Scottish context to be dictated by the Westminster College. But that the fact she doesn't suggests that the performance of our Westminster College isn't up to much.
Yeah. Because
if Starmer was shooting the lights out right now and we had an economy powering on all cylinders and people viewed that government as successful, bet him your bottom dollar that Anna Sarr would be talking about it every day. Mm-hmm. So it works both ways. I'm afraid it is it's the very happenstance of devolved and reserved politics, and it won't go away. So you might as well be complaining about the rain. I'm sorry, but it's just
I get you.
Yeah, I've heard this argument so many times. Yeah. It doesn't work like that.
It's also a problem that Labour play into. Labour could solve that problem if they wanted to, and they don't choose to. I mean, we'll maybe get onto new parties, but that's what we're talking about here. They're never going to get away from the fact that they're part of the Labour Party in the UK.
Yeah.
They've asked for the issue.
Kind of lean into it a bit. And just a final one, I want to mention Sticks and Stones on Twitter. Thanks for this. Who was quite critical, actually. It was a video of Geoff and Andy, of you guys talking about independence and some sort of, a reasonable level of agreement, perhaps, on the route to independence. Here's Sticks and Stones. Why don't you agitate the powers that you have and do them well now, instead of thinking you deserve more for messing everything up? Just a bunch of college-level pansies on a podcast. Giant pansies! In capital letters. So there you are, the latest.
I mean, you can't really disagree with it, though, can you? That's the worrying thing. Like, you're sitting there going, he's probably.
I don't think she had to uppercase the giant pansies, but that seems excessive.
We're assuming it's a she there, Andy, as well.
Quite Trumpian uppercasing of the giant pansies part, to be honest.
Giant pansies.
I feel like a giant pansy today, I tell you.
Just to say that on this podcast in a few minutes, we will welcome Calum Steele, now something of a policing commentator. He's a former General Secretary of the Scottish Police Federation. He is concerned about the state of Police Scotland. He's been writing about it in the Herald. We'll talk to him about it in the next few minutes on the pod. Do drop us a WhatsApp anytime you like. Ideally a voice note, but messages are welcome. You can get in touch on 0333 404 6507, or you can email us hot.com. Right, I want to just mention a couple of things, kind of with a Westminster... I suppose, foundation, but with implications for Scotland as well. Almost 50 Labour MPs rebelled against Sir Keir Starmer's flagship welfare reforms last week. The rebellion forced the government into dramatic U-turns. Cuts to disability benefits will be postponed. Changes will now affect only new claimants, and not those already receiving support. This was a huge rebellion. It was a huge political crisis, actually, for Sir Keir Starmer's Labour government. 4 Scottish Labour MPs voted against the government on the issue last week, joining that rebellion. Andy, in context, how big an issue is this, and what are the implications for Scotland, for the Scottish government, as we always have to consider with things like welfare?
I think it's huge, I have to say. I think it's absolutely massive. Not because there was a rebellion and a U-turn, but because of what it means for the next 4 years of their government. I think they're finished, to be honest. I don't like to exaggerate these things, and there's a lot of water that can pass under the bridge, but I think in terms of the Labour reform agenda, which they came in with, I think it's finished. Because the rebels are now in charge, and this was a mild set of welfare reforms. You could very well argue that the welfare reform required in this country, both from a social perspective, moral perspective, but also from a financial perspective, was much, much greater than what they were proposing, and they couldn't even get that through. And they're now not in charge. So anything else they try will be defeated. I suspect the next thing that they will try is some health reforms, and I suspect they will be defeated, despite the fact they've got the most reforming health secretary in recent memory. And they're now in a position where they can't cut spending, but they also can't raise money because they've got various tax pledges in their manifesto. And I don't think they should raise tax. I think that would make the economy even worse than it is just now. But they're just stuck. They have nowhere to go, and they have nothing to do. And I think it has been a remarkable year. And frankly, if I was Starmer and Reeves, I'd be looking at the next 4 years with utter dread.
Yeah. Perhaps that's why the Chancellor was crying in the House of Commons just the day after all of this.
There's just the problem is there is no room, there is no optimism for this whole situation now. The economy is awful. It has no real prospect of getting better. The welfare spend is eye-watering, particularly amongst the exact sort of people who should be in the economy growing it. We're in a complete doom loop. You know, I'm not given to pessimism. It's not my character, but I'm extremely pessimistic about the future of the UK for the next 3 or 4 years. On
that final point, Andrew, I would look at the OBR stats published. I mean, it's a quite niche subject perhaps for some of our listeners, but my God, that takes some pretty tough reading, that, in terms of the future of our economy. Look, I'm not sure they're completely dead in the water yet, but there is serious surgery needed to the government, and I can't for the life of me now understand why, given that there's been so many U-turns, and as Andy rightly assesses, it doesn't seem that he's in charge of his own party at this time. Why wouldn't you take the current events in Iran, Ukraine, Trump, and just say, look, the world has changed, right? National security is our overriding ambition, and that means greater food security, that means greater energy security, that means greater economic security, and throw the manifesto out the window, because it's gone anyway, frankly. Even if it hasn't all gone, the perception is it's gone, and start afresh, and then start calling the bluff out of some of your backbenchers and say, all right, well, if we're going to go there, it is a pretty serious times right now for this government, because they have no credibility. So therefore, face off your own party and say, right, this is it. We're changing tack, and should you not want to come on this journey with us, that's entirely up to you. And see if they'll actually, it's that serious just now for them,
Yeah.
And so I just think a total change of approach is required.
Just on the OBR, I'll give you some of the headlines from it and its warning yesterday. It warns that Britain's welfare spending could be £12 billion higher than forecast at the end of this decade after the government's U-turn. Just highlighting what you were saying, Andy, it's a huge financial black hole, actually, for Rachel Reeves. Here's a quote from Richard Hughes, chair of the Office for Budget Responsibility, who says, the UK public finances are in an unsustainable position in the long run. The UK cannot afford the array of promises that it has made to the public. Basically, politicians don't feel able to be honest about what is actually achievable. And I think that the kind of rebellion kind of highlights, doesn't it, something of a fragmentation of what the Prime Minister was trying to do and what his Labour MPs didn't let him do. I mean, this bill was so watered down, nobody's actually sure what difference it's going to make to anything now. Geoff, would it have been so bad if the Prime Minister had pushed on with his bill as proposed, as outlined, and then lost the vote and said, look, I tried these big reforms, and these are the people that said they didn't want them. Look at all these MPs who voted against them, so I'm going to go away and I'll come back with something else. Would that have been such a big political miscalculation?
No, I think actually, given where they were at that stage, I think you're spot on. I mean, I'd have just rather lost it and said, right, we'll respect the will of Parliament, we'll go back to the drawing board, and we'll think more. But the biggest problem is not there. It's that how the hell did they get to that situation in the first place? That, they must have known. What are the whips doing? Where's the advice going in saying, look, boss, we can't get this through. It's not going to happen. And so therefore you can try and mollify it or change it, augment it, or try and bring people on board and get your caucuses together, whatever the strategy is, way further in advance of that. But this 11th hour, we're going to lose this. What? It's extraordinarily bad politics, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, trying to be fair here, but it is poor politics. And, we gave the Tories an absolute hammering, rightly so. We give the SNP, rightly so, hammering in some of their legislative manoeuvres recently. This is fucking amateur hour.
And the most damaging thing, I think, is that the sort of thing Labour are trying to do, the Tory party doesn't have permission to do that from the electorate ever when it's in government. So the Tory party often has the will to do it, but not the permission. The Labour Party often has the permission to do it, but not the will. What we had this time, it looked like, with people like Streeting and Starmer and others, was they were going to be given the permission, and they also had the will to do it. And they flunked it. I mean, and the scale of the challenge is so big because the welfare bill is so high and the economic growth is so low. It really gives them a horrific challenge. And actually, it's only Labour, ironically, who can do that because they're the only ones who have the will to fix welfare in the NHS, which is what's swallowing the money.
Just a couple of notes then on devolution, because Scotland has its own devolved social security system. So the personal independence payment is currently being replaced by the adult disability payment in Scotland. There are more than 475,000 people on the benefits. That's about 10% of the adult population in Scotland, and it's risen by 50% in less than 3 years. So universal credit, that applies across the UK. So reforms to that will affect people in Scotland. There are other changes as well that are worth looking up, but those are some of the headline issues when it comes to social security and devolution and what this bill does or indeed doesn't do.
I've said a number of times in this podcast that, this is unsustainable what we have in Scotland. It really is, in terms of the outlay on this, on social security and all the rest of it, that we've talked about many, many times, and we should get somebody on, an expert, to talk about just how much this takes out of our budget. So the SNP are going to be behind the 8 ball on this as well. Soon enough, and sadly, it's all going to be a bit of a race to the bottom, isn't it? Oh, how you can see all the commentary already from this. We can't believe Labour would do this. It's terrible, and all the rest of it. What are you going to do, SNP? This is not an easy subject. Of course, it's not. Sadly, it won't resolve itself before 26.
Yeah,
but afterwards, it's not sustainable. The model we have in this country, no chance.
I think this kind of does bring us on actually to Paddy on X, who asked us to talk about what Jeremy Corbyn's new party means for Scotland. So, of course, ex-Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has seemingly been discussing the launch of a new left-wing political party, along with MP Zara Sultana, who resigned from Labour earlier this month. It's a party that would be on the left of Labour, of course, and would potentially hoover up some of these Labour rebels who are not overly thrilled with the direction of travel of the Labour Party as well. Andy, what does it mean for Scotland if this party is to get off the ground? And let's be real, it was a slightly chaotic couple of days for it. If it becomes a thing, what does it mean for Scotland?
Well, so I don't think this party is going to become a thing. It's just too marginal. I mean, it's socialism or barbarism appears to be their tagline. I don't think that's going to catch on much beyond the student union, to be honest. And I suspect that by 2029, they'll be talking to 7 people on Twitter in a North Islington wine bar. But that aside, there is space and scope for new parties. Reform have shown this very clearly, and I think that does have implications for Scotland. There is, every 100 years or so at Westminster, is a big, big party change, like when Labour was formed 100 years ago, and reform could stick and become that big change. And I think the implications for the Scottish Parliament is that somebody somewhere in these Scottish parties might say, actually, our Parliament with PR is a little bit different. We've got quite a bit of scope here to start something new, especially if there's lots of disruption at Westminster, so that the ties that are binding us at the moment start to break a little bit. Reform obviously might make an impression, but there may be other Scottish-only parties that can be created out of 2026 that could potentially make some sort of impression. It feels like there's a long way away, and it feels like we're a long way away in terms of time and sort of maturity level in Scotland to do that sort of thing. But at some point, the Scottish Parliament is going to look very different. It's going to be composed of very different parties, and it's going to be really a parliament full of parties for that parliament, rather than just arms of parties from a different parliament. So I think it's a matter of time before it happens. The big question for me is, can it happen in the next session, or will it have to wait a little longer?
Yeah. Anas Sarwar said it would be a parliament of minorities, didn't he, to us a couple of weeks ago, Geoff? This idea of kind of challenger parties, different parties, alternative parties emerging. What do you make of it?
Yeah, in terms of the specific question on the Jeremy Corbyn party, not enough time for it to make any real inroads in 26, I don't think. I've got to remember reform have been around a fair bit to try and get some traction. It takes time. I do think that post 26, regardless of who's in power, there is going to be, you're seeing it with Fergus Ewing, that, deciding to stand at the set, but I'm not saying he can start his own political party. You can see people kind of fracturing a little bit. You can see parties fracturing a little bit, I think. So I think there is, and I think actually the way around that is to embrace it and try and create coalitions, which happens, as Andrew points out many times on our podcast, elsewhere in Europe. But I think that's a likelihood. I do genuinely, and we'll see what happens.